Objection here. We have one more worry, and then we'll go to a couple kind of like responses with classical theists. And this is the idea of like Trinitarianism, and is like, is this compatible with divine simplicity? You do have a discussion with Rob Coons, which is probably a good resource for people who want to investigate this further. But could you talk about like the worry with like Trinitarianism and the doctrine of divine simplicity?
Yeah, so I think like the answer is like really straightforward of how this is supposed to go. So, but sometimes I'll hear people say, like, they'll try to push back a little bit before you, because like typically you just say, like, on the surface, how could you possibly have the Trinity there if you've got a simple God? But people will go, well, look, no. Like, simplicity has to be compatible with the Trinity because the early church fathers affirmed it. They affirmed Trinity and simplicity together. But if there was a conflict, like, they would have noticed it. But not only that, these people will say, like, the church fathers saw simplicity as like safeguarding the Trinity. And so this is kind of the way they'll try to like set up the dialect of the debate. And I don't find this persuasive. And here's why. First, if the early church fathers thought that simplicity was so crucial to the doctrine of the Trinity, I don't know, maybe they should have like mentioned it in like an ecumenical creed. But the Nicene Creed makes no mention of it. And so that's kind of curious. Second, lots of people don't notice contradictions in their own thinking. Like, this is incredibly pervasive, like in our own, like in human thought. Like, we often do not notice a contradiction in our own thinking. Even when people like point out contradictions in our thinking, we still like just like dig our heels in and go, no, it's not there. And so this idea of like, oh, well, they would have noticed a contradiction. Like, we don't notice contradictions all the time. What are you talking about? Have you met a human? Surely you've met a human before. Third, lots of philosophers and theologians in the past and today have pointed out that there is a direct contradiction. And so what needs to be done is you need to remove the contradiction. Here's how you get the contradiction. So the doctrine of the Trinity says that the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit are not identical. Simplicity says that anything intrinsic to God is identical to God. And so I've repeated that line a few times. I'll repeat it again. Simplicity says that anything intrinsic to God is identical to God. All that is in God is God. Well, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, they are intrinsic to God. So that means the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, they're identical to God, which then entails that they're identical to each other because that's how identity works. Identity is transitive. So you've got a contradiction. The Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, they're identical. And the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit are not identical. So, okay, you got this contradiction. Again, it seems like you should be like, okay, Pali, like game over. Like this is not working. Now, a classical theist named Tim Paul, he points out that you cannot appeal to ineffable mystery in the face of a derived contradiction. And so what we've done here just now is we've derived a contradiction. So the classical theist cannot appeal to mystery at this point. Instead, you got to pinpoint where in the argument, which premise you want to reject and why you reject it in order to remove the contradiction. That's where the dialectic stands, I think.